Has it, and the Phillies have the National League Championship. They have beaten the Padres 4-3, and they celebrate on their home turf as the Phillies are the 2022 NL champs.
Hey there, podcast pals from WHYY and BillyPenn.com. It is Hittin season. I'm your host, John Stolnis from The Good Fight. You can follow me on Twitter at John Stolnis. And coming up, we're going to talk about this Phillies-Braves series. We only have one game to talk about right now. After the game on Wednesday night got rained out, they'll play one more on Thursday afternoon. But joining me to talk about the Braves and the National League East and the rest of the National League a little bit, and to give us his perspective on what he has seen from the Phillies so far this year, is Kris Willis, good buddy of the podcast. He's from the SB Nation Braves site Battery Power. He's going to join me to talk about all that. Plus, Bryce Harper's power outage. What's going on there? And I'll take a look back at one of my favorite Phillies games of all time, 20 years later. Just a phenomenal game from 2003 that I wrote about for The Good Fight this week. All that coming up here on this edition of Hittin Season. But real quick, let's talk about this Phils-Braves series. And like I said, not a lot to talk about as the Phillies welcomed Atlanta to Philadelphia for this 3-game series. The game on Wednesday night got rained out. Really kind of unfair to the people who were in attendance. They just kept saying it'll be 7:15. It was supposed to be 6:40. And then from like 7:15 until like the 9 o'clock hour, they just didn't give any updates at all. And you had people sitting at the stadium wondering what's going on, what's happening with the game. And so I don't know if we'll ever get a real explanation as to the delay in the decision making, or at the very least, if you don't know whether or not you're going to get the game in, to at least continue to give updates and say we're continuing to watch the weather. We're seeing there might be a window, but we're not sure. We'll let you know as soon as possible. But there was just no communication, at least online, that we could see. And the beat writers were saying on Twitter that there was no notification being given, that nobody had any idea where things stood in the rainouts. That's just not the right way to handle that kind of thing, you know? People drove all the way to the game. They went there. They expected to see a baseball game, and you can't help the rain. You can't help that. You can't help a game getting rained out, but what you can do is give people information. I hope people in the stadium were better informed than it seems like they were from somebody sitting in his office a couple hundred miles away, but didn't seem to be the case on Wednesday night. Nevertheless, this will now be just a 2-game series, with the final game of the series coming on Thursday. The Wednesday night game will be made up as part of a doubleheader on September 11th, and that will be the next time these two teams play each other after this series. Will be in September when the Braves come back to Citizens Bank Park. So let's talk a little bit about Tuesday night's 4-2 loss. A disappointing loss, a lot of remnants of the issues and the frustrations that we saw in the month of May. The Phillies pounded out 11 hits and scored just 2 runs in that loss on Tuesday, and that's because 10 of those 11 hits were singles. Now, they got 8 hits off of Spencer Strider. And Strider, his numbers are not very good this year. He's got an ERA in the high 3s, but he looked like a guy who could get a strikeout whenever he wanted in that game. He struck out 9 Phillies hitters and did not walk a batter, but he did give up those 8 hits. But he had his fastball going at 98 miles an hour, and it seemed like every time the Phillies got a couple of guys on, he was able to find a strikeout. And so those runner in scoring position woes surfaced yet again. They were 1 for 12 with runners in scoring position in the game on Tuesday. You also had JT Realmuto make a boneheaded base running gaffe. That's an issue that happened a lot in April. We haven't seen a whole lot of that over the last couple of months, but JT Realmuto in the 8th inning with 2 outs and a runner on, trying to stretch a single into a double when they're down by 3 runs, and got thrown out at second base and prevented the tying run from coming to the plate in that situation. Just a boneheaded play that a very smart baseball player like JT Realmuto cannot make, and he knows he cannot make that, but it cost the Phillies their last potential shot to tie the game. Actually, now they did get the tying run to the plate in the bottom of the 9th with Kyle Schwarber coming to the plate. A runner was on with 2 outs, but he struck out against Raisel Iglesias to end the ball game, and the Phillies fell 4-2. A lot of conversation about Rob Thompson's decision-making with bullpen usage in this one. And I will be the first to admit it was not conducive to actually winning an important baseball game. Ranger Suarez was outstanding. He went 6 innings, gave up 4 hits, 7 strikeouts, 2 walks, just allowed a solo home run to Austin Riley. He was phenomenal. Yet again, Suarez has been on a roll, but the Phillies needed to cover 3 innings after Suarez left, and they turned to Jeff Hoffman, Andrew Vasquez, and Dylan Covey. Now, Hoffman and Vasquez have been very good this year, but there are some more high leverage guys that you would have thought the Phillies would have brought in that situation. After the game, Rob Thompson said that Matt Strahm, Jose Alvarado, and Junior Marte were all unavailable due to workload, apparently having pitched in 3 of the last 4 games, but there was also an off day on Monday. So it really just, to me, didn't make a whole lot of sense that some of these guys were not available. I mean, that was some Joe Girardi level stuff right there. And how do you not have those guys available for a series as important as this Braves series? This is the team in first place in your division. You trail by 8 games. And with fewer games against divisional opponents because of the new balanced schedule, you have to take advantage of every single one of these games. And it just seemed like the Phillies, once they got down 3-1 in this game, they just punted. They just said, we're done. Or even once the Braves tied it up. I like what Hoffman gives this team. I like what Vasquez has given this team. They've both been very good, but Hoffman gave up a run and Vasquez gave up 2 runs, and they are not the 7th and 8th inning guys in a mid-June game against the Atlanta Braves if you really want to try and get back into the divisional race. That was some Joe Girardi level stuff there from Rob Thompson. I think he was overly cautious with those bullpen guys. I think Craig Kimbrell should have gotten in this game in the 7th or 8th inning. Because remember, we're not strictly using closers, right? We're not saving Kimbrell for a 9th inning that wasn't going to happen. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And there was something that I saw on Phillies Nation, and I don't remember who wrote this, but it was a good point that they made. There is absolutely no excuse for Dylan Covey to be on this team right now and for Connor Brogdon and or Andrew Bellotti to be pitching in AAA. There's just no reason for it. Both of those guys were impact relievers in the bullpen in the playoffs last year. They were guys you came into this season thinking would pitch this exact situation. And they're in AAA, and you've got unproven guys like Hoffman and Dylan Covey getting these moments. That should have been Connor Brogdon out there in the 7th inning. And I'm not going to argue Andrew Vasquez. He's been a very, very good left-handed reliever for the Phillies. I didn't have a big problem using Vasquez in that spot if Jose Alvarado and Matt Strahm and Gregory Soto were all available. But where was Gregory Soto? Why does Gregory Soto not get that inning? Right? Why does Craig Kimbrell not get that inning? They went into a game against the Atlanta Braves down 3 relievers against the divisional opponent who's leading the division, the 5-time defending NL East champs. This is a series you have marked on your calendar to make up some ground, and you don't have 3 of your best relievers with Seranthony Dominguez on the injured list. They're not available. You don't make a move before the game to bring up a guy like Connor Brogdon or Andrew Bellotti so you can keep Dylan Covey in the bullpen. Dylan Covey, who never pitches except in losing situations anyway? This just doesn't make any sense. It's bad roster management. I think the Phillies got caught off guard here. I don't know what it is they were thinking with Dylan Covey here. They think he's going to be a bulk guy. With Chris Sanchez now in the rotation, you don't need Dylan Covey. He stinks. Connor Brogdon or Andrew Bellotti should be in this bullpen for situations like this. And that's not to say that one of those guys wouldn't have given up a run or two, because it's entirely possible they would have, but they at least have a track record. I'm not comfortable with Jeff Hoffman in that spot. I don't care how well he's pitched this year. That's not a spot for Jeff Hoffman. And you could argue Gregory Soto should have gotten that inning over Andrew Vasquez. Gregory Soto is an experienced closer in this league. He's a little volatile, but that's the guy you want in that spot if Jose Alvarado can't go. And it still seems silly to me that Strahm and Alvarado and Junior Marte all were unavailable due to workload here in mid-June after an off day the day before. That's just not acceptable. And it really ruined a great pitcher's duel between two really contrasting styles in Ranger Suarez and Spencer Strider. Both these guys were outstanding, and they just did it in such different ways. You've got Strider, the young right-hander who gets guys out with power, and then in Suarez, the left-hander who mixes in breaking pitches, has to hit the corners, just paints the ball beautifully up, down, in, out, fastball, off speed. He had the best offense in baseball guessing all night long. 29 of Ranger Suarez's last 33 innings have been scoreless. And he has a 1.38 ERA over his last 5 starts against the Mets, the Nationals, the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, and the Braves. Those are 3 very good lineups that he faced against the Dodgers, Diamondbacks, and Braves. Opponents are now hitting .214 against him with a .584 OPS in his last 5 starts. And John Clark noted that he's given up 1 earned run or less and gone at least 6 innings in 4 straight starts for the first time in his career. And he now has 3 straight starts with 7 or more strikeouts, which is a career high. This is what I thought we were going to get from Ranger Suarez from the start of the season. When I predicted that he would be an all-star, I felt like, and you've heard me say this before, so this is not 2020 hindsight, that second half run and his performance in the postseason proved to me he could be a well above average big league pitcher. And right now, I think you'd have to call him this team's co-ace. He has stepped into the role that we were expecting Aaron Nola to play, to be that shutdown guy, to be the guy who can go 6 innings and give up 1 earned run or less. Right now, Ranger Suarez is the number 2 on this team, and it's not even close. So this is what I predicted, as this is what I thought we would get. He's not going to make the all-star team. It's probably too late for that to happen, but this is what I was talking about. And right now, he is pitching like a co-ace of this team. Now, one of the big topics of conversation after the game on Tuesday was Bryce Harper's power outage. You've heard me talk about this a couple of times over the last few podcasts, and the power outage has continued, but we saw Todd Zalecki write about it. Matt Gelb wrote about it because Bryce Harper talked about it after the game. He is still stuck at 3 home runs on the season. Now, I was fortunate enough to see his first home run back from the injured list against the Red Sox a few weeks ago, but he is stuck on 3, has not hit a home run in his last 22 games. That is the 3rd longest streak of his career. And he has just 1 home run in his last 32 games, the fewest in that length of time since his rookie season. Now, I mentioned Gelb wrote a piece in The Athletic about this on Tuesday, and he noted that one of the issues is that Harper is seeing fewer fastballs this year than he ever has before. Now, I'm sure there are things going on with Harper's swing that Kevin Long will address, and that if you had swing mechanics breaking it down, they could probably tell you he's maybe dropping his shoulder, or he's not dropping it enough, or his swing plane is off so that he's not able to lift the ball, whatever the reason is with his swing. He's also seeing fewer fastballs this year than he ever has before. His career average is 50.9%. Throughout his career, he's seen about half the pitches he's seen have been fastballs. Last year, it was only 45%, and that was the fewest he'd ever seen in a season before. But this year, it's down from 45% to 38.3%. So career number of near 51% down to 38% is a huge drop in fastballs. Pitchers are just not throwing him heaters. And he's seen a big uptick in the number of sliders that he's seen, from 18% a year ago to 26% this year. Has also been a 1% increase in curveballs. So just seeing a lot more junk this year. And those pitches are harder to hit out because hitting number 4 in the lineup, I don't think he has quite as much protection behind him. And I'm not the biggest guy on lineup protection necessarily, but they can kind of pitch around Bryce Harper right now. And he has yet to find his power stroke on breaking balls. He's also not hitting fastballs out of the yard either, but just seeing far fewer fastballs, so maybe he's in between a little bit more, but he's still hitting the ball hard. The exit velocity is the same. His line drive percentage of 27% is a career high. The problem is that his launch angle and his fly ball rate are way down. Fly ball rate of 28.9% is by far a career low, and his launch angle of 7.3 degrees this year is down from 11.8 a year ago and 13.3 2 years ago. Meanwhile, his ground ball rate of 43.9% is a career high, slightly up from last year's 41.5%. Now, to his credit, I will say that I think Bryce Harper's attitude and his approach to dealing with this power outage is the right one. making the point he doesn't want to try to hit home runs. If he goes up to the plate and he starts trying to lift the ball, all you're going to see from Bryce Harper are pop-ups and flyouts and strikeouts. That's all you're going to see. So Bryce Harper is right that he just wants to keep hitting the ball hard because he's in a power slump. But to be clear, he isn't slumping overall. On the season, he's hitting .301 with a .393 on-base percentage. Now, his slugging percentage during this homerless drought is under 300, and that's certainly not what you would expect, but he still has an .817 OPS on the season. His walk rate and his strikeout rates are right on target. Everything else about him is good, right? He's had a number of multi-hit games in recent weeks, but it's a lot of singles, right? A lot of singles from Bryce Harper. And that, of course, is not what you're expecting from your cleanup hitter. But again, as we've said over and over again, he could be dealing with issues with his elbow. I don't know that his elbow is 100% coming off of Tommy John surgery. Maybe he's dealing with something there that's causing him to change the way he swings. Maybe the swing's not as violent. Maybe that's taking away from his uppercut a little bit. I don't know. You can bet Kevin Long and Bryce Harper are looking at video or somebody's checking out the swing to see what's going on. I know Harper sometimes doesn't want any of that information. He just wants to go up there. He wants to see the ball and he wants to swing. And that's what works for him. So that's great. I'm not overly concerned about the homerless drought. If he hadn't come back 2 months early from Tommy John surgery, yes, I'd be fussing about this. But he's also being productive in other ways. He's hitting a lot of balls hard. He's getting a lot of hits. He's getting on base. He's getting some clutch RBIs. You would like to see those power numbers go up, and so would he. But he is right not to try and artificially change things to elevate the ball and hit more home runs, because all that's going to mean are infield flies and lazy flyouts to the outfield. You don't want that. We want him hitting the ball hard. And if eventually he is going to get his power back, it is going to come back. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So that is the state of the Phillies here after just one game in this Phillies-Braves series. Well, this Braves team that we are fighting here this week, again, it's going to be a shortened two-game series because of the rain out on Wednesday night, but we're getting a glimpse. We haven't seen much of the Braves this year because of the rebalance or the balanced schedule. So this series is actually the last time the Phillies will play the Braves until September. So not a lot of games to make up ground, the chasm that exists between these two teams. But so we really haven't gotten a chance to see this team all that much. And joining me to talk a little bit more about the Braves is our good friend of the podcast, Kris Willis. You know him from the Battery Power website, SB Nation's Brave site. You can follow him on Twitter at Kris_Willis. Kris, thanks for coming back on Hittin' Season again. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me.
No, it's always good to talk to you. Nobody better to talk to about the Braves, I think. And this has obviously been a great season from your perspective, from Atlanta's perspective. I wasn't so sure the Braves would be able to pick up where they left off from last year. I felt like losing Dansby Swanson, maybe they would take a little bit of a step back, but they haven't. It's amazing to me that they're doing this with some of the injuries in the rotation that they're having. We'll get to that in just a second here. But just generally speaking, are you surprised by how good Atlanta has been this season? I mean, maybe that's a dumb question of the to ask of somebody who follows the defending five-time division champs.
I think it is a little surprising. You mentioned Dansby Swanson. I think all of us kind of expected a little bit of a step back there, and it was a bit of a surprise when they opted to go with Orlando Arcia. And I mean, he's went out and put up arguably his best. Well, not arguably, it is his best season of his career. He's probably, I know he's leading the All-Star voting at shortstop, but he probably deserves to be leading the All-Star voting, which is, something I never thought I'd be saying. But, it was just like with this team, they touted their depth, all the way through the offseason, all the way through the spring. And I think it has shown up because they've dealt with a number of injuries and have just been able to just keep plugging along. And, I mean, they're 21 games over 500 right now, and Max Fried's, has made, I think, 5 starts. So, if you'd told me that back in April, I'd been really surprised.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the offense in just a minute because they are pounding the ball like no other team in Major League Baseball is this year, except maybe the Texas Rangers. It's close. The two teams have been maybe the two best offensive teams in baseball this year. But I really do think it's incredible what the Braves are doing when you consider Max Fried, like you mentioned, has only made 5 starts. Kyle Wright has been on the injured list all season long. These are two of their very best pitchers, two of your very, very best guys who haven't really pitched at all this season. And the Phillies have had their fair share of success with some young guys. Ranger Suarez has turned out to be a very good starting pitcher at the major league level, but it just seems like you guys churn out one really good young pitcher after another. And this year, it's Bryce Elder who's jumped in 14 starts at 2.60 ERA. We all know how good Spencer Strider is, and I haven't really been keeping super close tabs on Strider, so it was kind of surprising to see a 3.93 ERA from him. But you've got a young guy named Jared Schuster who I know the number, the 4.57 ERA doesn't look so hot, but he's come up and he's given you guys some starts too. Talk a little bit about some of these surprise guys who have managed to pick up the slack. How are they doing it?
I mean, Bryce Elder, he got a little bit of run last season early, struggled, went back down to the minors, but finished the season really strong. And, and I think we overlooked him a little bit. I mean, even in the spring, he got sent down to minor league camp really early with about 3 weeks to go and actually began the season at AAA. But I mean, when you look at this rotation, I don't think there's anybody that's been bigger than what Bryce Elder's done. I mean, he goes out there, he's not overpowering, hits his spots, got a lot of spin on that slider, and he's just giving the Braves a chance just about every night out. And really, with this offense, that's about all they've asked anybody to do, at this point. So, Jared Schuster got knocked around early, went back down to Gwinnett, and then has come back up. And he's had his ups and downs as any rookie pitcher will have, but he's kept them in games. And AJ Smith-Shawver, who was supposed to pitch tonight. He's a 20-year-old, started the season in high A, and here he is in the majors in the rotation. So, a lot of intriguing arms. I think they've had to lean a little heavier into them than what they were expecting to, obviously, with Fried and Wright out. And I mean, even Ian Anderson, he's out for the season with Tommy John. I think they were, kind of expecting to see him at some point too. And, it's just they've thrown a lot of guys at the problem, and have somehow just kind of been able to keep stringing it all together.
Let's talk a little bit about the offense here. It's amazing. I'm looking at their numbers here on Baseball Reference. They have one everyday regular with an OPS plus under 100. It's just crazy. And one, so that's Michael Harris, who was again one of the top rookies in baseball last year. And the third baseman Austin Riley is right at 100. And every time it seems the Phillies played the Braves, Austin Riley does some damage against them. So it's hard to believe that those are maybe the two worst offensive performers for Atlanta this year. Even Marcell Ozuna has a 110 OPS plus, a 797 OPS. But I mean, this team just pounds home runs. I mean, you've got, if I'm looking at the numbers right, you've got 7 guys in the starting lineup with double-digit home runs, with 12 home runs or more right now, and that's just absolutely bonkers. And I guess my question is, can they keep this up all year? Like this seems the rate at which they're pounding the ball doesn't seem sustainable over the course of a full season. Is this something that they can keep going, this entire lineup acting like this?
I mean, I think this lineup is deep, and it's probably the deepest one that they've had during this 5-year run of division titles. But, I don't know that they can keep this rate up. I mean, over the last for the first couple of months, it was just a couple of guys here, a couple of guys there. Michael Harris was struggling, but since the start of June, end of May, this lineup started to click in a lot of ways. Ozzie Albies has come alive from the left side. Eddie Rosario's had an unbelievable last 2 weeks. He's got something like 5 home runs in his last 7 games. Michael Harris won NL Player of the Week this week, hit over 500. He's come back around after a really slow start. And what it's done, I mean, you've got the usual suspects in Ronald Acuna and Matt Olson, Sean Murphy's come in and added to the lineup, really. So, I mean, there's not a lot of places to go get outs. I mean, you mentioned Austin Riley, I mean, he's been in the top 10 in MVP voting the last 2 seasons, and he's kind of been the guy that's not really had the hot streak yet. So, I think it's a really, really good lineup. I don't know that they're going to continue to hit home runs at this rate that they're on right now, but I do feel like, they've got to be one of the better offenses in the league.
It feels like, as I've been kind of looking at their schedule lately, I think I saw that they've played 3 teams with a winning record over their last 17 games. Have the Braves kind of had an easier schedule of late?
No doubt. May was ridiculously hard month for them. They played a ton of the AL East, and everything. And then June, it was like there was a series with the Mets and there was this series with the Phillies. But the rest of the schedule was kind of an opportunity for them to, take advantage and really put the pressure on the rest of the division. And, obviously the Reds are red hot now, so that's changed the calculus a little bit too. This was an interesting week right here with how well the Phillies and the Reds were both playing. But yes, this month, this was an opportunity for them. And, they kind of survived May, and I think May was, looking back on it, I think that was the toughest month that their schedule they'll have the whole season. So, it's one of those things. I mean, you play those bad teams, you got to take advantage of it. And I mean, it's as so far, they've done that.
What do you make of the schedule? The fact that there are far fewer interleague games, the fact that the Braves are coming to Philadelphia for the first time this season, and it's actually closer to late June than it is really to early June at this point. First series starts on June 20th. First time these teams, only the second series these two teams have played. And then, like I mentioned before we started talking, that this is going to be the only series these teams play again until September, when they'll play each other 2 more series in September. And then that's it. I mean, it feels weird, and I'm not sure that I like the fact that these divisional games have been trimmed down in favor of interleague games, more games against the American League East, and get those games in against the Tigers and the White Sox. I'd like to see these 2 teams play each other a little bit more, and not just because the Phillies need head-to-heads in order to get back in the division race if they're going to do it.
No, I mean, there's some things I like about it and other things I don't. And I mean, it does seem weird that, we've waited this long really for the Braves and Phillies to meet. I think that's a downside to it. I have enjoyed seeing a lot of the teams that we don't normally get to see on a year in, year out basis. But, I mean, you just think back the last 2 seasons, if you get off to a bad start, like you said, I mean, there's just less head-to-head opportunities to run down an opponent, in a lot of the ways. I mean, we've seen the Braves do that for 2 straight seasons. This year, they obviously got off to a good start. And, I think it's going to be tough on the Phillies and the Mets just because you just don't have that many opportunities, as far as it goes. So, I'm a little, I don't know. I think, I think I'm going to miss some of those divisional games late in the season and whatnot too, but just because, I expect the Phillies and the Mets to, really stock up at the trade deadline. I think it'll still be a good race. But at the same time, I've enjoyed, seeing a lot of these teams that you just don't get to see, before. It was 3 or 4 seasons before you might see Mike Trout come to Atlanta or, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good trade-off. I mean, I know Phillies fans would love to see, Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout come to town, as would Atlanta fans. And it's great to see some of those guys from Seattle and the other, the other teams that you don't normally get to see all that often. So there is that trade-off. I do get that, but I do miss these series against I don't miss series against the Marlins and Nationals all that much as I like beating up on the Nationals. Those games just don't have a whole lot of juice to them anymore. Right. But these series against the Braves and Mets certainly do. So before we just kind of jump into some of the other teams around the National League, what's your sense on the Phillies? What is your sense on the slow start they keep getting off to year after year, and the fact that they've kicked it into gear here in June? And what is the gap, as you see it, between the Phillies and the Braves? We obviously saw the Phillies beat the Braves in 4 games in the division series last year, but if you're taking a longer view of things, it's pretty clear the Braves are a superior team.
Well, I think the Braves have probably a more overall depth, but I mean, I don't think the gap's that far. I mean, really. I mean, when I look at these,
is it a 9-game gap on paper? I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't think so. Really, and I mean, you can go back to. This is funny. I've thought about this every day probably since the last time I was on the show with you. I remember, at the end of last year, we're sitting there 2 weeks to go, and the Braves have run down the Mets, and at the time we talked, I mean, there was some question whether Phillies were even going to make the playoffs. And I can remember, I don't think I said anything too derogatory, but 2 weeks later, look how different everything was. I mean, the Phillies look like the best team in the National League, and they proved that. They got hot at the right time. So I don't think the gap's that much. I mean, I know the Marlins are having a storybook start to this season, but the Phillies are still the team, to me, that's got the firepower in a series to go head to head with the Braves. And I think that's why this series here, I hate that we got a rain out right here, because I thought it was a pretty good measuring stick, for both teams, honestly. And and I mean, they were the two hottest teams, well, besides Cincinnati, but they were two hottest teams, in the National League coming into this series. So, I think it's I haven't got to watch the Phillies too much this time. I know Trey Turner's better than he's playing. Yeah. And I just feel like, that's a guy, if you get in one of these short series, he can beat you. He can single-handedly beat you. We've seen Bryce Harper do that. You've seen Kyle Schwarber do that. You've got two stud frontline pitchers in Nola and Wheeler. I think I think the bullpen, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the bullpen's actually pitched a lot better.
Bullpen's been good.
Bullpen's
been good.
And that was something that was always seemed like that was kind of the difference. When it come right down to it, the Braves bullpen would pull them out in a lot of tough spots and the Phillies just couldn't do that. So, I see these teams as pretty similar. I think the Braves might have just a little bit more firepower at this point, but as we've seen, anything can happen once you get to
I think the big difference between Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think the big difference between these two teams right now is simply the power difference. I think pitching staff-wise, I think the Phillies starters are pitching as well as anybody in baseball right now. But they struggle to put runs on them. When they hit home runs, the Phillies win games. Right. When they don't hit home runs, they don't hit games. And that sounds really simple and dumb, but this team goes into stretches where they become a singles machine. And that's kind of what's happened over the last few games. They were pounding the ball in Arizona, and then in Oakland, they reverted back to, a bunch of slap hitters. And it's the Bryce Harper power drain has been really eye-opening. He's still doing a lot of good things, but has a slugging percentage, I think, under 300 in his last 20 games or so. It's just the power stroke from a lineup that really every big moment in the playoffs last year virtually was a home run of some kind. And so it's been frustrating as a Phillies fan to watch the offense and to watch Aaron Nola struggle the way he has this year too. Give me your thoughts on the Mets. I know you maybe not have seen the Mets a whole lot either, but the fact that they are struggling with the payroll that they have and the expectations put upon them, should we have seen this coming? The fact that, they have these aging pitchers that they gave so much money to, and they have this lineup that they've paid a lot of money to, but they're not performing. Are you surprised at how much the Mets have struggled?
I'm not as optimistic about the Mets as I am about the Phillies. I feel like at the end of the day, the Phillies will be there. The Mets, I felt like the Mets overachieved a lot offensively last year. I mean, if Alonso's not going, if Alonso's going, Pete Alonso's, and if he's hitting and he's hitting for power, that offense can get by a lot, I think. But they just don't have I don't think they've got the, top to bottom. I don't think they can match, with Philadelphia or Atlanta in the East. And then, as you said, that pitching staff's been a mess. They've been riddled with injuries, but then, Scherzer's starting to look a little bit more like Scherzer, but, Justin Verlander's been up and down, was hurt start the season. And I just look at guys, Starlin Marte, those guys are great players, but they're on the wrong side of 30 now. And, they're signed to big contracts, and I just see them trending the wrong way. I won't be surprised at all if they get it together and, make it respectable again, maybe challenge for a wild card spot. But I just don't think as they stand right now, I just don't think they can stay in the race. They're going to have to make a move at the trade deadline, and if they keep struggling like this, then the move may be to sell, which is something that I can't even imagine. After the offseason that they had.
Yeah, that would be a really difficult decision for Steve Cohen. I'm trying to imagine him doing that. That would be that would be a shocker, but it might ultimately be the best thing for that team. So we did mention also too, you mentioned the Marlins, the fact that they had been on a roll. They've lost 2 in a row. Thankfully, finally, they're starting to, realize that, the earth is round and things, you can't live on magic and mirrors and everything forever. But the Marlins are 42-33 here as we record this late on Wednesday night. The Cincinnati Reds are in first place in the Central with an 11-game winning streak. You've got the Diamondbacks leading the West, but now you've got the San Francisco 49ers on a 9-game winning streak. And so my question to you is, of those 3 surprise teams, the Cincinnati Reds, San Francisco Giants, Miami Marlins, which of those 3 teams do you think has the most staying power?
I'd have to go with the Reds just because they're in the Central. I think the bar is a lot lower for them, and man, they have a lot of young, exciting players, and to me, the Braves are going to get a look at them after this Philadelphia series too. We'll get to see them for 3 games, but I'm intrigued by their young pitching, and in that ballpark they've got plenty of power. And in the Central, you just don't have that many teams you have to jump over. The Giants surprised me. I really hadn't paid that much attention to them, and was looking at the standings today, and I thought, wow, where did they come from? Because I didn't really see them, doing this. But that's a franchise that defies expectations a lot of times, and so yeah, it's I would go Reds first as the biggest surprise, and then the Giants maybe right behind them.
And then the Marlins, you don't think the Marlins can sustain what they're doing?
I don't know. I mean, the thing about it, they've won all those 1-run games. And, I mean, it's not unheard of. I can remember the Rangers doing this a few years ago and winning the division. I mean, I don't think you can question the Marlins pitching. But I think it comes back to that offense. Jazz Chisholm's been hurt. They've done this without him, which is pretty impressive. But he was kind of struggling before that.
Yeah, it really is.
Can Jorge Soler, stay healthy enough? I mean, all Braves fans know what he can help, how he can help a lineup. But can he stay healthy over the long haul? And I just don't know if I really buy into that offense, against the top teams. But credit to them, because their young pitching can match just about everybody, and they've done this without Sandy Alcantara looking anything close to what he was last year. So I probably shouldn't discount them as much as I do, but they're still a negative run differential for the season. I know it's gotten a lot better than it was early on, but still I think they've got to prove a little bit more in this division.
So yeah, it's been a very weird start to the season here in the National League with some of these long winning streaks and some of these surprise teams. That's what kind of makes it fun. And I'm looking over the Giants roster. Like, unless you follow the Giants closely every day, I don't think there's a person out there that could name 3 people in the starting lineup. I mean, it's just there are no household names there. I mean, Brandon Crawford's the only guy that I would probably have been able to guess, and he's got an OPS of 679. But I mean, like guys like Patrick Bailey, their catcher, is like an 841 OPS. Lamonte Wade Jr. has an 878 OPS. Mike Yastrzemski. Most people know Mike Yastrzemski, 808 OPS. Yep. But like J.D. Davis at third base. Michael Conforto has a team high 12 home runs for the Giants, which is just kind of incredible. What comeback story for him. So very weird team. All 3 of those teams with lots of holes. I think all 3 of those teams have more holes than the Phillies do, and frankly more holes than the Mets do. But it's a long season, still more than half of the season to play out and see if those teams can hang with it. Well, listen, folks, if you want to keep an eye on what's been going on with the Atlanta Braves during the course of the season, because again, we're not going to see the Braves for a good little while until September, make sure that you're reading Battery Power, the SB Nation Braves site, and follow everything Kris Willis is doing by following him on the Twitter machine at Kris_Willis. That's Kris with a K, by the way, kids, KRIS_Willis. Kris, thanks for coming back on Hittin' Season, buddy. Always a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All right, I want to finish up the podcast talking about one of my favorite memories as a Phillies fan, and this goes back 20 years to the 2003 season. There was a series, the Phillies played against the Red Sox, and for those of you who were big fans of the team during that 2003 season, Jim Thome's first season in Philadelphia, you will remember this game. It's the Todd Pratt game, of course, the one that caused Scott Graham, the Phillies radio broadcaster that day, to lose his ever-loving mind, and you could hardly blame him. I wrote about this game for The Good Fight on Wednesday, so you can read about it there and see the highlights of this game, because it truly was amazing. But this was a 4-hour and 45-minute masterpiece of drama. Can you imagine? I mean, I can't even imagine baseball games going 4 hours, 45 minutes anymore. We've just totally eliminated that from the baseball lexicon. But you had 35,512 fans inside the soon-to-be demolished Veterans Stadium watching the Phillies and the Red Sox, a Red Sox team that would go to the American League Championship Series in 2003, lose on the Aaron Boone home run in Game 7, but then the following season in 2004, with Curt Schilling on board that team, win the World Series after trailing the Yankees 3-0 in the ALCS. So many players from that team were at Veterans Stadium for this phenomenal game that took place on June 21st, 2003. I remember watching this game on TV, and it was just incredibly riveting. The Phillies beat the Red Sox 6-5 in 13 innings in this game, and it had all the feeling of a playoff game, which if you were a fan of the Phillies in the late 90s and early 2000s, you didn't see a whole lot of that. And so when the Boston Red Sox came to town, it was still kind of new to have a team like the Red Sox come to town. The TV executives put the game on national TV. It was the national Fox game on a Saturday afternoon. Boston, the year before, even though they didn't make the playoffs, had won 93 games in 2002. So they were in the midst of becoming this marquee team once again. The Phillies, in the meanwhile, were still trying to find their identity, but they had surprised the baseball world by signing Jim Thome to that huge mega contract before the start of the 2003 season. And you had a pretty good starting rotation there. You had Vicente Padilla, you had Randy Wolf, you had Kevin Millwood at the time. You had a number of different pitchers there who could throw the baseball a little bit. And it was like, I remember during the beginning of the season, we said, hey, we got a rotation full of number twos. Like, there's just a whole rotation full of number twos. And you had a bunch of established guys in the bullpen, even though the bullpen struggled all year. The names were full of guys that were supposed to be good. And so when this series began, Boston came in 11 games over 500 at 41-30. It was a 3-game series. The game on Friday night, first game of the series, was rained out. So the game on Saturday turned into a 2-game series, a Saturday afternoon and a Sunday afternoon game. Boston started at 41-30. The Phils came in 4 games over 500 at 37-33, much the same position that the 2023 Phillies are in right now. And in today's wildcard era, those 03 Phils would have been in a fine position for a wildcard spot. But 20 years ago, there was a little bit of frustration and panic that the team wouldn't quite be good enough to stick with this Boston team. But this was kind of a measuring stick series for the Phillies. And this game was nuts. The Phillies had to navigate a lineup full of Manny Ramirez, Johnny Damon, David Ortiz, Jason Varitek, Nomar Garciaparra. Garciaparra went 6 for 6 in this game. On paper, the Phillies lineup of Thome, Bobby Abreu, Mike Lieberthal, Placido Polanco, and a very young Pat Burrell and Jimmy Rollins were not really on par with that Boston squad. But the Phillies won both games of this abbreviated 2-game series. And on this game that we're going to talk about, this 6-5 win in 13 innings, it truly was one of the most memorable games I've ever seen. You had Pedro Martinez in his prime. Led the league in ERA with a 2.22 ERA. Led the league in ERA plus, FIP, WHIP, hits per 9, home runs per 9, strikeouts per 9. He finished 3rd in the American League Cy Young voting. He was outstanding. This was like when he was just at his zenith. And for the Phillies, they had Randy Wolf on the mound. And it was a mismatch on paper. Wolf finished the season with a 4.23 ERA, but at the time of this game, he had an ERA in the low 3s. He did make 33 starts, pitched 200 innings, and picked up 16 wins on the season. So Wolf was a fine low-end 3, high-end number 4 starter. But on this day, Wolf was almost as good as Pedro. He went 6 2/3 innings, gave up just 2 solo home runs to Todd Walker in the 3rd and the 6th inning. Martinez was even better. He went 7 innings and gave up just a solo home run to Bobby Abreu in the second. So as you go to the bottom of the 8th inning, the Phillies are trailing 2-1. Again, you've got this pitcher's duel. It was a really crisply played game. Turk Wendell, Rail Cormier, Terry Adams, Dan Plesac combined to throw 4 1/3 scoreless innings from the 6th inning when they relieved Randy Wolf all the way through the 12th inning. Really did a great job here. But trailing 2-1 in the bottom of the 8th, you had Boston right-handed reliever Mike Timlin facing Jim Thome with 2 outs. And as he has done throughout his Hall of Fame career, Jim Thome delivered in the clutch and launched this monster home run deep into the right center field seats, tying the game at 2. And here is the immortal Harry Kalas on the call for Phillies radio.
The 1-1 pitch, swing and a towering drive to deep right center field. This ball way out of here. Tremendous home run, Jim Thome. And this game is tied at 2 in the bottom half of the 8th inning.
The Harry calls, man, they're just goosebump inducing, man. Anyway, the teams traded scoreless innings then in the 9th, 10th, and 11th innings, but in the 12th, Boston got an RBI triple by Kevin Millar off of Phil's closer Jose Mesa to put Boston in front 3-2. So enter the bottom of the 12th inning. The Phillies are down to their final out. And you got Red Sox reliever Jason Shield on the mound facing Jim Thome once again with nobody on. And nobody thought Jim Thome was going to get a fastball to hit. But Shield did something that he absolutely should not have done, and that was give Jim Thome something to hit, and hit it he did. Here is Scott Graham with the call on Phillies radio.
The payoff pitch to Thome. Swinging a drive, deep center field. Going back, Damon. He did it. He did it. Home run, Jim Thome. We're tied at 3. He tied it. He did it. Number 17, Jim Thome. It's a brand new ball game here in the bottom of the 12th.
That electric homer tied the game at 3-3 once again, sending a delirious fan base into the 13th inning. Now, despite Thome's heroics, it appeared Boston would, in the end, win the day. In his second inning of work, Jose Mesa struck out Trot Nixon and Freddie Sanchez to start the 13th, but then allowed a 2-out single to Johnny Damon, an RBI double to Walker, and an RBI single to Garcia Parra, his 6th hit on the day, and then gave the Boston Red Sox a 5-3 lead heading into the bottom of the 13th. Hope seemed lost, but the Phillies had a little bit of magic left. Facing Shield for a second inning, Abreu led off the 13th with a walk. Lieberthal was retired on a fly ball to right, but after defensive indifference allowed Abreu to take second, David Bell laced a 1-out RBI double to center, making it a 5-4 game. And now you've got the tying run in scoring position. So manager Grady Little goes out and replaces Shield with Rudy Sionez to face Todd Pratt in his second go-around as the Phil's backup catcher. He was the backup to Darren Daulton in 1993. Todd Pratt was the last man on the bench, and what followed next is etched forever in Phillies history. Scott Graham here with the legendary call.
Now the stretch. 1-0 pitch. Hit hard to deep center field. Damon going back at the track. Looks up. It's gone. It's gone. Put this one in the win column for the Fighting Phils. Todd Pratt won it. He won it. Dead center field home run. They're going crazy here at Veterans Stadium. Unbelievable. Todd Pratt coming off the bench, the last player the Phillies had left. Took one pitch from Rudy Sionez down in the dirt and said, let's go home, boys. We got another game tomorrow. 6-5 the final. Phillies win it. What a game.
Pratt's home run was certainly a memory maker, but Scott Graham's call was just as big a memory maker. It's kind of shocking because Graham never made calls like that, but he must have just been really amped for this series because he was on fire in this game. And make no mistake, this was an electric game. This was an insane game. It had playoff intensity, which is just not something we were used to in Philadelphia at that time. But it was such an iconic call that the Phillies made a bottle opener that they gave away, I think, the following season to commemorate the call. It was just bizarre, and I know a lot of people who had it. And then riding high off that win, the Phillies swept the series. They won the following day on Sunday 5-0 behind Brett Myers. They lost to the Braves in the game after that, and then won 7 in a row. It looked like the Phillies were on their way, but as we all remember from that 2003 season, it was not to be. They fell apart in the last week and a half of the season, lost 6 in a row, 7 of their final 8, and missed out on a chance to go to the playoffs, falling 5 games behind the Marlins in the wild card race. They finished 86-76, and under the current rules, the 2003 Phillies would have been the 3rd wild card. They would have made the playoffs just like the 2023 Phillies did. As a matter of fact, the end of the 2003 season was not too dissimilar from the 2023 season. Some similarities and some parallels between these two teams in terms of how they started, how they played, where they were in June of 2003, and where they are in June of 2023. The only difference was Major League Baseball much stingier in the amount of playoff spots that they were handing out to teams than they are now. And certainly the Phillies of 2022 benefited from that generosity. So just a few months after that game, Veterans Stadium would be torn to shreds, but I do believe that this was the last great Phillies game ever played at that beautiful old decrepit stadium that I saw so many baseball games in during my youth. 20 years ago today, I do believe the Todd Pratt game against the Boston Red Sox was the last great Phillies game ever played at Veterans Stadium. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of Hittin' Season. My thanks to Kris Willis once again for popping on the podcast. And folks, if you haven't done so already, I would love for you to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and a review of the of Hittin' Season. Would love to hear what you have to say about the show. Would really help us out a lot if you would go and do that if you haven't already. And even if you haven't done it in a while, would love to hear back from you. And let us know if you still think it's a 5-star show and what you think about the podcast. Also, our Hittin' Season Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Hittin' Season for all kinds of bonus material there. Want to also just encourage you to check out billypenn.com every day, and you can find everything we're doing on our landing page there at billypenn.com/Hittin' Season. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time right here on Hittin' Season.